Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into the wild, totally unprecedented journey of how a tiny college dorm room project essentially rewired the modern internet. From its super scrappy beginnings all the way to becoming a global superpower, we're going to unpack the entire history of Facebook. So let's kick things off with this 2003 quote from Mark Zuckerberg. He literally suggested putting faces next to farm animals to have people vote on who's more attractive. Yikes, right? It sounds shocking today, but honestly, it perfectly captures that early, move fast and break things hacker mentality. That vibe would basically become the company's entire DNA for the next 2 decades. Which leads us to the huge question we're tackling today. How in the world did a pretty controversial college prank turn into a trillion-dollar global empire? Because the scale of growth we're about to look at is just absolutely staggering. Here's our roadmap for the explainer. First, from face mash to the Facebook. 2, the era of hypergrowth. 3, IPO and major acquisitions. 4, controversies and data scandals. And finally, number 5, rebranding to Meta. Let's get right into it. All right, section 1, from face mash to the Facebook, the dorm room hacker. We're heading back to late 2003 and early 2004, right into the dorm rooms of Harvard University. Notice the crazy fast pivot from controversy to a legit business here? So, FaceMash was built by actually hacking into Harvard's intranets to scrape student photos. Naturally, the Harvard Administrative Board shut that down fast for privacy and copyright breaches. But, that controversial data scraping completely laid the groundwork. Just a few months later, in February 2004, the Facebook launched with a tiny $1,000 startup fund from Zuckerberg and Eduardo Saverin. Fast forward to the summer. After expanding to other Ivies, they snag a massive $500,000 angel investment from Peter Thiel. The fuse was officially lit. Moving on to section 2, the era of hypergrowth, opening the floodgates. This is where Facebook finally sheds its Ivy League exclusivity and opens up to, well, everybody. Their expansion strategy was just incredibly aggressive. They started with Harvard in 2004, but by 2005, they had already moved into high schools and big corporate networks like Apple and Microsoft. This was right around the time they dropped the from their name after buying the facebook.com domain for $200,000. And then the floodgates fully opened. In 2006, literally anyone aged 13 or older with a valid email address could jump in. Dropping those barriers to entry entirely changed the trajectory of the internet as we know it. And the result of that open door policy? Absolutely explosive. Just look at this staggering leap in active users. Late 2004, they're sitting at a very respectable 1.5 million. Fast forward 4 short years, boom, 100 million. By 2010, half a billion. And by 2012, they hit 1 billion active users. And you know what's really wild? Is that amidst this insane growth, they actually became cash flow positive ahead of schedule in September 2009. So they weren't just growing for the sake of it, they were making real, serious money. All right, section 3, IPO and major acquisitions, building an empire. That hypergrowth basically forced them out of startup mode and right onto the public market. On May 17, 2012, Facebook held its IPO, placing the company's total value at a massive $104 billion. At the time, that was the largest valuation ever for a newly listed public company. Now, to be fair, the IPO itself was actually kind of rocky at first. It was plagued by NASDAQ technical glitches, and the stock price immediately dipped. But ultimately, it gave Facebook an absolute war chest. And believe me, they immediately put that cash to work. $1 billion. I mean, just let that number sink in. In 2012, right around their IPO, this is exactly what Facebook paid to acquire Instagram, which at the time was just a tiny 13-person photo-sharing app. This move kicked off a super aggressive acquisition strategy designed to eliminate rising competitors and basically consolidate human attention entirely under the Facebook umbrella. Now contrast that $1 billion with this number, $19 billion. Just 2 years later, in 2014, Facebook handed over this massive sum in stock and cash for the messaging app WhatsApp. It really highlights the sheer, almost unfathomable financial power Facebook wielded by this point. They were literally buying up the global communication infrastructure. And the craziest part? It wasn't even just social media. That exact same year, 2014, they dropped another $2 billion on Oculus VR, a virtual reality startup. This is a super fascinating data point because, as we're going to see a bit later, this early bet on hardware heavily foreshadowed the massive corporate pivot they'd make years down the line. Which brings us to Section 4, Controversies and Data Scandals, the Data Reckoning. This is the era where that old move fast and break things hacker mentality finally, truly caught up with them on a global stage. So, the real turning point for public perception was definitely the Cambridge Analytica data scandal. Back in 2018, it came out that a British political consulting firm had harvested 50 million Facebook profiles completely without authorization. They used this data to build systems that profiled and targeted voters with personalized political ads. And if you think back to our first couple of slides, those early warning signs of unauthorized data scraping trace all the way back to Zuckerberg's dorm room with Face Mash. It was kind of like the chickens finally coming home to roost. Suddenly, the pressure was mounting from literally every side. After the 2016 U.S. election, the platform faced intense scrutiny over fake news, hoaxes, and ad buys by Russian operatives. On top of that, people were heavily criticizing their newsfeed algorithms for creating these polarized filter bubbles. There were massive global debates over content moderation, specifically regarding hate speech and the incitement of violence. It all really culminated in 2020, when the FTC and a huge coalition of states filed an antitrust lawsuit aiming to break up the company, demanding they sell off Instagram and WhatsApp. Basically, both their ad platforms and their algorithms were being questioned by governments around the world. Just look at the rapid sequence of events here in 2018. In March, the Cambridge Analytica story breaks. By April, Mark Zuckerberg is literally testifying before the U.S. Congress. And then, by July 2018, Facebook becomes the first company in history to lose over $100 billion in total company value in a single day, following some really disappointing sales reports. That invincible armor they wore for so long, it was officially cracking. And that takes us to our final chapter, Section 5, Rebranding to Meta, the Metaverse Pivot. Facing intense regulatory heat, slowing growth, and a seriously tarnished public image, the company decided to try and shed its past to radically redefine its future. I mean, just contrast these two eras. It is truly night and day. On one side, you've got the Facebook from 2004, a simple digital student directory designed just to connect college kids at Harvard. And on the other side, the 2021 rebrand to Meta. And this wasn't just a simple name change. This was a massive announcement that their entire corporate focus was shifting away from traditional social networking to instead build a huge, interconnected virtual and augmented reality metaverse. But you might be wondering, why pivot so drastically? Well, this single metric right here really tells the whole story. In February 2022, Facebook announced that its daily active users dropped for the very first time in its entire 18-year history, falling to 1.929 billion. It was a massive wake-up call. Competition from highly engaging apps like TikTok, combined with slowing ad revenues, forced them into a really harsh reckoning with their core business model. For the first time ever, growth was no longer guaranteed. So I want to leave you with this provocative question to think about. Is this massive pivot to Meta truly the next evolution of human connection? Or are we witnessing the beginning of a social media death spiral for the company that basically defined the internet for 2 decades? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope you walk away with a much clearer understanding of this massive corporate journey, and I highly encourage you to keep pondering what the future of our digital connectivity really looks like.